The world is full of uncertainties. Your data storage shouldn't be one of them. Meet the new NetApp All-Flash SAN Array, a simple solution for all your business-critical applications. The ASA delivers dedicated block storage with superior performance, data availability, and guaranteed efficiency, as well as integrated data protection. How good is it? We guarantee availability for not 4, not 5, but 6 nines. Yeah, you heard that right. Our all-flash SAN array delivers 99.9999% uptime. Worried about cybercrime? Don't be. With our new ransomware recovery guarantee for primary storage, backed by tamper-proof snapshots, you'll be able to recover your snapshot data in the event of a ransomware attack. NetApp guarantees operational simplicity, built-in security to manage and recover from ransomware threats, and efficiencies to meet or exceed your sustainability and savings goals. Get your data storage ready for the modern world. NetApp.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to NetApp On Air. As always, I am your host, Nick Howell. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a minute since we've had a show. Last show was a few weeks ago with Mr. Glenn Sizemore of VMware talking about VMware Cloud in AWS, and I thought it apropos to bring in my guest today as a perfect follow-up to that, because some of the things Glenn and I talked about had to do with this guest and this service today. Real quick, before we get started, though, make sure you head over to netappdiscord.com and come join the community. We've got thousands of people in there, to staff, executives, engineers, all kinds of stuff to answer all of your questions, and a lot of peers, a lot of your friends and colleagues in the industry are hanging out in there talking about problems, helping each other out. So make sure you come and join the community over at netappdiscord.com. We're really charging forward to Insight right now. Insight is happening. It is back. And registration is open now. October 23rd through the 25th at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. Back in person for the first time since 2019. Four long years. But I can't wait to see all of you guys there. Bring all of you here to Vegas, my new home that I moved to during the pandemic, if some of you know. But yes, very much looking forward to seeing everybody at Insight and excited to have you there. We're going to have lots of fun activities around our Discord community, plus so much more to do. Free certifications, labs on demand, tons and tons of breakout sessions, and a really kick-ass keynote. So make sure you guys get registered and make your plans to be at Insight 2023 in Las Vegas on October 23rd. And I might have a little surprise for you coming up that you want to be in Discord to see. So make sure you get in there and join us in anticipation of that. Without further ado, it might be a hint as to what we're talking about today, based on the shirt that I have on. A couple of weeks ago, I was up in Seattle for a little event called AWS Storage Day. And a couple of years ago, NetApp and AWS brought a new service to market after a couple of years of engineering efforts, launched this new product called Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP. And that's a big, long phrase that describes basically what we're going to be discussing today. And the person that I wanted to talk about it with is one of the people that have been at the forefront of it from the very beginning. And I want to bring him on right now. He is the head of product for FSx ONTAP over at AWS. Please help me welcome Mr. Andy Crudge. Andy, thank you for joining me today, man. And it was good seeing you at Storage Day a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, Nick, for having me. And great pick with the shirt here. I feel overdressed now.
reInvent 2021, I believe, was when we had these, shortly after the launch at Storage Day that year.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Andy, if you don't mind, fill us in. Who are you? Who is your daddy and what does he do? Who are you? And like, how did you find your way into this sort of really glorious role? I think there's a big burden to carry this into the market like this. How did you find your way into FSx ONTAP originally?
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Andy Crudge. I currently lead the product management team for the FSx ONTAP service. In terms of background, I've been at AWS for just over 7 years now, working in product management within our file organization. At the time that I joined, Amazon offered one file service. It was called Amazon EFS, or Elastic File System. I joined as a product manager on the team. I've had the amazing opportunity to work on EFS to help us bring the Amazon FSx family to market in 2018. So helped to launch a service called Amazon FSx for Lustre about 5 years back. And then, after a few years of focusing there, started working with NetApp and bringing the FSx for ONTAP service to market in 2021.
How did FSx come to be? Like, what's the backstory there of like why? So you had EBS, you had EFS, you had the world famous leading object storage of S3 that was, we saw in the mid 2010s object storage sort of start to take the world by storm. And whether it was in the HCI vector or whether it was in the cloud side of things. But as DevOps came up, so did object storage and so did S3 in that respect. Like, why FSx? I guess I'm curious, not why, but like, how did you get to the point where you noticed that there was a gap in the services that you already had across EBS, EFS, S3, et cetera, to now need something else called FSx?
Yeah, so it's a great question. It comes really primarily from a lot of the customer discussions that we've been having as an organization with customers who are either adopting our services or looking to migrate over to the cloud. A core theme when we talk to customers and engage with them, back around the time that I joined, back in the 2016, 2017 timeframe, a common pattern we've seen is that a lot of customers are really excited about moving their data and the workloads that their data powers to the cloud. There's a lot of benefits that the cloud provides. It allows customers to improve their reliability, leverage a lot of our multi-AZ services, improve their security bar, reduce TCO, and leverage all of the different compute and analytics services that AWS has to offer so customers can do even more and gain even more value from their data. So there's a lot of reasons why the customers we've been talking to have been really excited about bringing their data and bringing their applications over to the cloud. And one of the patterns that sometimes we would see is we'd be talking to customers who've used particular file system technologies historically to store their data on or to power their workloads. And in some of these cases, these customers may have spent years building scripts, building tooling, building operational practices, or maybe they use third-party ISV software that integrates with and relies on a very specific type of file system to power their workloads. Windows shops relying on Windows Server, for example, for their storage. ONTAP customers, there's a huge ecosystem around ONTAP. And what we found is that customers were, when we took a step back, what we were hearing from customers is they wanted to move to the cloud. They wanted to move to the cloud as quickly and as easily as possible and start getting a lot of those benefits of being in the cloud as easily as possible without having to do a whole lot of heavy lifting of re-architecting away from the technologies they've used. And so, those two things put together ultimately led us to say, hey, you know what? Why don't we, to serve these customers, why don't we just give customers, really what they're fundamentally asking for, which is the exact same file systems that customers are used to today. So you don't have to do any re-architecting, re-qualifying, recertifying, retooling in the deployment model of a cloud service. So not only is your storage, a cloudified storage, you can deploy it in minutes, you can scale it up, you can scale it down, you can do all of these really cool native modern things with your storage, but also now your data is in the cloud, and so you can access it from any of the compute services available as well. And so that's what led to us launching the Amazon FSx family, which is something we did in 2018. At that time, we launched two services. We launched FSx for Windows File Server, so it's a Windows Server-based file system, and we also launched Amazon FSx for Lustre, which I mentioned before is kind of my baby in that time frame, and it's really kind of a high performance computing, high performance optimized file system for large scale kind of high IO workloads.
HPC type workloads, yeah. Do you still see it being as relevant? Quick aside, is Lustre still as prolific as it was 5 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're, in this day and age, you hear a lot in the news about generative AI and machine learning workloads. The need for customers to store large amounts of data and to process it as quickly as possible is something that's ever increasing over time. And so I think, as we look to any of our services, a big theme that you'll see across all of our offerings is we're constantly raising the bar in performance, including with FSx ONTAP. One of our big launches last reInvent was we doubled the maximum performance of the service. But yeah, performance scalability is an ever increasing need.
Yeah. It seems like the more you do, the more we need, in that sense. It's a never ending race of scale and performance, and flexibility around that kind of stuff. Okay, that great backstory on FSx. Some of those things I didn't even know, honestly. Like there was the history there of what you started with, but I'm looking at a place where I start to see some overlap. How does a customer choose which one they want to use, and is it typically driven by what they're already using, and they're just looking for an equivalent, mirror of that or version of that in AWS?
Yeah, so for to a large extent, one of the big value propositions of the FSx family is if you're used to using a particular file system, if we offer that file system, it's a really easy transition to come over. Actually, fun fact: the name FSx is kind of a play on words. It stands for FS is like file system, and X is a variable, kind of like in algebra class. And the idea again is we offer a number of different file systems. The service is built in a way where we could offer different options. And so, yeah, the prototypical use case would be a customer who's used to, for example, using NetApp ONTAP can come over to FSx ONTAP and kind of have a like for like experience in the cloud.
Yep.
But the reality is also as a big part of what we do in FSx is we offer these popular file systems as a fully managed and fully integrated service. And so what that does is it significantly lowers the barrier for customers to adopt file system technologies, because you don't have to, for example, be an expert in managing ONTAP in order to use FSx for ONTAP. A lot of the heavy lifting of infrastructure and software level management and networking is fully managed and integrated into the service. And so a cool thing we're seeing is customers maybe who weren't using a particular file system before, maybe customers with net new workloads, or even customers who may have preferred one file system in the past. We are seeing customers sometimes switching because that barrier to entry is so much lower now with FSx that it's easy for customers to say, hey, you know what, this ONTAP service offers this really cool SnapMirror cross-region replication capability. And because it's so easy to use, let me try it out. Let me see how it works. And so we're seeing a trend of customers also taking that leap when maybe they wouldn't have historically, but now it's just so easy to do so.
That's my favorite story, is when I find a company that, or an administrator, cloud admin, cloud architect, whatever, that has really never worked with, they might have heard the name NetApp somewhere. We do enough SEO and stuff like that where you're going to run across us at some point, but may have never worked with us, don't know what ONTAP is, that it's our storage operating system, but they might not know what SnapMirror is, but they kind of stumble over it backwards over their heels because they're working in AWS already, and they happen to see a blog post or they happen to see the service in there, and they go in and start tinkering. And there's at least two, I won't name names, there's at least two customers that I've come across that were like that. They had either never worked with ONTAP before, or maybe they were with a competitor or another on-prem infrastructure vendor that they didn't know that this thing even existed, and that actually led to replacing on-prem hardware with NetApp, because now you've got ONTAP like across both. Obviously, you'll see the on-prem going to the cloud. That's kind of a very common story, but the inverse is also true. And that's probably the thing that I never really accounted for when 2 years ago when this was coming up. It was a big epiphany moment that I remember having it. I think it was reInvent 2021, right after we had launched. And I remember hearing that story for the first time, and I went, oh my God, I didn't even think about that as like an opportunity, right? For us for that kind of an audience to vector towards. So yeah, it's great that people discover it or that know about it from their on-prem experience. But what it really tickles me are the ones that have no idea what NetApp or ONTAP is and what it could do for their business, and they stumble into it because it's in FSx and in AWS. I think that's one of my favorite stories.
Yeah, no, I mean, they're really exciting stories. And, I think that speaks a lot to the value that we're providing by offering ONTAP as a managed service, is really just making it super easy for anyone, whether you're a storage admin or an application owner or a developer, to click a few buttons, get a storage system that's, it's a fast NFS share that could do snapshots and so much more. And so that's definitely really, really cool to see.
I think my favorite, we were just at AWS Storage Day a couple weeks ago up in Seattle, up at AWS HQ, and we had a customer there that went on right before us, and one of the things he said was very profound, and it's something that I find I mix into my conversations all the time, and it's that because FSx ONTAP now exists in AWS, you can now all but wholesale replace what you would use as a secondary data center or a colo facility or whatever that might be in an on-prem infrastructure environment and execute the exact same workflows. You're literally just switching the tracks. Yep. That's really all you're doing. As long as the plumbing's in place, you got your direct connect sorted out with your ISP or your colo facility, whatever. As long as the plumbing is there, you can literally just switch the tracks, shift your snap mirrors from one to the other, and then completely decommission that secondary facility. And that is one of the that's the way I find most people are starting. I mean, with most things, it starts with backup and DR. It's just from my experience over the last 20 years, everything always starts with that. But once they get in there and discover that they can do that, they can just as easily do that with, I don't know, production databases, virtual machines, anything that you can do. SnapMirror is SnapMirror is SnapMirror. It doesn't care whether it's a backup from 30 days ago or whether it's a live production virtual machine. It'll mirror it. So that's one of the big things that I look at as well, is like how people actually adopt this. And I'd be curious to see, have you seen similar things from the AWS side from an adoption standpoint? Is that how people are going about doing it, or is there something that I might be missing?
Yeah, I mean, it really is a choose your own adventure in a lot of ways. What you teed up is a very common pattern that we see. A lot of the customers being talked to, one of the things that they share is one of their most immediate term goals is to get out of the business of managing their secondary data center. Yes. Maybe they have workloads where the workloads are going to remain on-prem for at least the time being, but they have a secondary site and they're looking to remove that. And so having the option to flip your DR to being on FSx ONTAP, and to your point, you're just changing the tracks. It's the same SnapMirror. It's all of NetApp's replication technologies just work with FSx. That's been a really exciting thing we've seen customers be able to do because of how easy it is. At the same time, a bunch of customers are also migrating their entire workloads and applications over. Whether it's a database workload or a CRM system, ERP system, there's a whole bunch of different workloads customers move over. And so, that's of course a pattern that we'll see. It really just depends on where a customer is in their cloud migration journey. What are some of the benefits they're specifically looking to achieve and when. One of the great things of having your storage DR in the cloud is now you no longer need to manage your storage infrastructure, your storage software. It's all, taken care of by the service. If you're moving both your storage and your application over, now those same benefits extend to your compute environment as well. Now you get fully managed storage as well as, managed infrastructure for your compute as well. So again, it really just depends on what balance customers are looking to strike. The third thing we're seeing, which is we actually, this is something that Vanguard presented up on stage with us last reInvent, which is sometimes we're seeing use cases where customers have compute that is still on-prem. For example, end user laptops. I don't think any of us are planning to start commuting to a data center anytime soon. Folks work from home, folks work from their corporate offices. And sometimes you need to be able to map your H drive on your laptop. And so another pattern we see is customers who maybe had data on-prem can migrate it over to FSx. And you mentioned earlier that you're seeing some customers actually buying additional NetApp hardware as a function of them adopting FSx. Well, a cool thing we saw with Vanguard is the customer is using FSx for their primary data. And what they've also done is they have a NetApp filer they've deployed on-prem that's being used as a cache for their cloud data. And they're using FlexCache and NetApp features. So what you're getting is you're getting fully managed storage for all of your data, plus you're getting the low latency access from on-prem that you would have as if your data were actually stored on-prem.
Yeah, FlexCache, I feel like we could sit here and talk for an hour about just the use cases and the power of FlexCache. Whether it's for AI workloads and you want to inference somewhere else or train somewhere else, like you can leverage cache for that. You can gather it all up and do all of your training in one place, but then the core production data set can be in the core, and vice versa, on-prem or cloud. Either one works, whichever way you decide. People have come up with all these catchphrases train in the cloud, run on-prem, or whatever they've said these things. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter. That's what I want people to take away from it. FlexCache is incredible because it can do just about anything. We're seeing it for developer use cases. If you have source code repositories that you need to do unit testing against, you can FlexCache that. You can even do this between regions in AWS, between different instances of FSx. So I'm looking at this as a way to, not have to wholesale migrate, forklift everything from one place to the other. Relocate your backups by doing a fan out. It's not a hard cutover. You can fan out and run 2 snap mirrors, and after the 30 days, cut it over, or however long that needs to be, and then decommission the other one. It's very elegant and graceful, just like you were running 2 instances of ONTAP anywhere else. So for the long time, seasoned graybeard OGs like myself, understand that ONTAP is ONTAP is ONTAP. And you can absolutely do everything in FSx that you've been doing maybe in your secondary data center as well. Yeah.
Yep. No, exactly. And going back to the why FSx and why we launched it, with FSx for ONTAP, when we talked to customers, we heard loud and clear, ONTAP has such a rich set of capabilities. We just talked about 5 of them in the last minute. FlexCache and SnapMirror and SnapVault and all these really, really cool technologies. And we, with this service, we're kind of intentionally have taken an approach where what we're fundamentally offering is an ONTAP cluster as a service, if you will. When you create an FSx, what we call a file system, you're getting an ONTAP cluster. You can take that cluster, you can cluster join it, you can create SnapMirror relationships. You as a customer, the cluster is managed by Amazon. The infrastructure is managed, the software is managed. If there are components that fail, we're automatically going in and ensuring your file system, your data is being served, is being available, is durable. But at the same time, you as a customer have direct access to use these capabilities. And that was a very intentional kind of design decision that we made based on the feedback that we heard from customers, which is, a big power of ONTAP is all of these really rich capabilities. And so we wanted to make sure if we're going to offer ONTAP as a service, we do it in a way where we're giving customers the capabilities they're asking for. So that, to your point, FSx is just another ONTAP cluster as far as technologies like SnapMirror and FlexCache and SnapVault are concerned.
Almost all of the Flex, I jokingly say all the Flex and Snap words. So almost all, at this point, almost all of the Flex and Snap words work. They're part of it. Most recently, it's a great segue. It was announced the SnapLock inclusion, the launch. We've now brought SnapLock as an immutable, however we describe it, an immutable source of whether it's archival, whether it's to protect against ransomware. There's a dozen different use cases to use. I used to work in healthcare before my NetApp days, and we would use it for legal holds, malpractice lawsuits, or anything like that. Or auditors, right? We were a public company, so we had auditors that would come in every 6 months, and they would need to see certain random copies of a backup of a database, from a particular date. If you're a public company and you've ever gone through SOX audit, you understand. But that's one use case. SnapLock was one of those things that I noticed was missing at the beginning that I kind of raised an eyebrow about. Did we miss out on that one at the initial launch? So I'm very excited to hear, especially because of my history of it, that it's there now. What was your experience bringing SnapLock into the fray of FSx ONTAP?
Yeah, it's a really exciting feature. I'm really excited that we're able to bring it to the service, and it launched just about a month ago, last July. So it's a pretty recent feature.
It's not new though. What I was just describing was in 2008. It's been around. DoD classified and levels of encryption and security. There are massive amounts of reasons to use SnapLock as an add-on to things like SnapMirror and SnapVault. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry, I cut you off there.
No worries. But yeah, absolutely. That's a good clarification. Yeah, SnapLock's been around for a long time. It's been a month of us bringing it to FSx. And one of the great things again about the model is the SnapLock we have on FSx. It's the same SnapLock. We didn't rebuild SnapLock from scratch in an FSx twist. It's it is the same SnapLock. We've even engaged with the third party, and we've gotten SnapLock compliance certified on FSx. There's a number of SEC, for example, certifications that, again, if that is familiar to you, you know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yep.
But there are a number of certifications that financial services customers actually need the storage to have in order for them to be able to store certain sensitive data on SnapLock volumes. And so, that's an exciting piece for us to bring to the service. But yeah, I think one of the, there's kind of two key use cases we're seeing around SnapLock that customers are looking to adopt. One is this kind of compliance use case where, if you're in a regulated industry, you may have certain data, certain documents you need to lock for a long period of time.
Yep.
And I think that use case works really well, especially with that disaster recovery workload that we talked about before, where now customers, in addition to closing down their secondary data center, being able to replicate their disaster recovery data to FSx, now if some of that data needs to be kept around for a long period of time, they can also now use SnapLock on their DR copy and meet that need as well. So that, very, very standard use case, very exciting one for us to see. Another one that's pretty interesting that we're seeing more and more of over time is this idea of using SnapLock as a means of giving you an additional layer of protection against ransomware. You see in the news every once in a while, unfortunately, there will be organizations impacted by ransomware attacks. And in some cases, these attacks involve taking data that maybe was owned by the organization and making it inaccessible in a way that, you put the organization into a tough bind. And one of the really powerful aspects of having immutable storage is that storage is immutable. It's immutable whether you want to change it or an attacker wants to change it. And so this notion of using immutability as a means to give you an extra layer of protection against ransomware attacks, it's also an exciting use case, just giving customers a bit more protection for their data. And again, it's something that we support as part of having SnapLock on FSx.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the other ones I'll throw in there, like the original reason it was created to go back was worm archival. And, and especially in regulated industries, there's a lot of worm archival type stuff that goes on. Write once, read many, for those that don't know the acronym. But it's the ability to have legacy archive data there that's still indexable, searchable, readable, and can be used in that way, but not able to be deleted or manipulated or changed in any way. And now taking that and using levels of encryption, using different levels of immutability and all of that, and then, if I can speak NetApp for a minute, just building it into your overall architecture of fanouts and your cascade pattern that you would use to jump from system to system via SnapMirror, and then maybe you go to another system or another region with a Snap Vault to take an actual backup off of that one-to-one mirror, and then maybe you can Snap Vault that backup into a Snap locked repository. That is nirvana for any data center or storage administrator. Like that level of not only number of copies, functionality, protection, all of that is absolute nirvana. That's the unicorn and rainbow state that you want to see yourself in. And so when we used to do that across data centers, across different systems that would be in data centers, like I look at that now and go, we can do literally the exact same thing with FSx. We can do it between regions. We can do it across between on-prem or maybe a colo facility up to other regions in FSx ONTAP. I look at that as, man, the sky's the limit literally now with what you can possibly do with this. And now that we've finally got SnapLock, I feel like the picture's complete. Because we've had Mirror and Vault from the launch for the last 2 years. Now we've got SnapLock in there. There's almost no reason anymore to keep a lot of that stuff on-prem. There's more cost-effective ways to do that than pulling tapes and dealing with Iron Mountain and having to go through rotations and all of that kind of stuff. Just from a staffing perspective, we really simplify that entire workflow and logistics of keeping all your data, especially if you're regulated, and especially if you have to keep long-term archival around. speaking as healthcare, we had copies of our database back to 1995 that I would have to test and bring online. Not that old, not bring online that old, but like 7-8 years. Yeah, we'd have to test all of that stuff. So SnapLock, SnapVault all really enabled us to do that.
It's awesome to hear. Yeah, and your data, if you if you use if you replicate your data from one system to another, and then it's ultimately snap vaulted to a SnapLock volume, the great thing is it's just a volume. You can mount that volume as read only. You can see all the data. You don't need to physically lug any tapes around or anything like that. It's accessible in a read only format if you ever need to access it.
Okay, I'll tell you one more fun one. We replaced, when we implemented at my customer, when we implemented SnapLock, we replaced one of those old Legato towers that were like the laser discs. That's what we were using at the time. And we brought in NetApp and ONTAP. That was my origin story of NetApp, was actually replacing that old Legato thing. And then at the same time, VMware was coming up. So in parallel, while we were doing this, it was like, oh, wow, vSphere 4 and NFS and 10 gig Ethernet. And this kind of alignment of the stars all happened at once in that 2008 timeframe. Shared storage became so prolific. VMware became a big deal. And then when we got 10 gig from the Nexus switches from Cisco and vSphere 4 with NFS data stores, like all of that happened within the same, I'd say, 12-month period. And it was just this coalescence of greatness to bring everything together. I look at that as similar. I have deja vu feelings about that. It's unfortunate that it was during a worldwide pandemic, but over the last 2 to 3 years, I've felt this same kind of coalescence of all of this stuff finally coming together, and cloud not being this unattainable, unachievable reach for the stars kind of thing that for enterprises, for on-prem architects and things like that. And it's been due to because of things like FSx ONTAP.
Yeah, it was really exciting to see, for sure.
All right.
And I think you're right, by the way. I think this is the last of the snaps and the flexes that we didn't support in FSx. I haven't done the tally myself, but I think you may actually be right on that one.
Yeah.
So.
This was the one that I think this was the one that I picked out and noticed that it was missing from the list. And I kind of went, wait, something's missing here.
Yep.
So, but I love that we have FlexCache. I think that one, I mean, with the rise of Gen AI and sort of the rise of developer culture, developer relations, DevOps, whatever phrase you want to use, whatever segment you want to categorize there, I think FlexCache is going to be a sneaky one that's going to become one of the more popular services, especially now that we're going between on-prem and cloud, and potentially between regions globally. I think we could see sort of a renaissance for FlexCache to come back around and do another victory lap that we haven't even realized yet. SnapMirror, SnapVault, SnapLock, those have been around for decades at this point. FlexCache has been around for a minute, but it's been mostly dedicated to on-prem and secondary sites. Now, if we look at how it could the use cases, specifically with Gen AI and inferencing and training and things like that, there's definitely ways that can be used, even if it's just sources for Jupyter notebooks or workflows for Spark or anything like that. There's definitely ways that you can leverage FlexCache as a caching mechanism to make sure that the right data is in the right place at the right time for the right workload. And you can strategically go about, like, where are your developers geolocated, make sure that there's a FlexCache copy in the closest regional data center to them, and then they can work with that data set versus another team that maybe is on the other side of the world, whether it's India or in Europe somewhere. Like, that can also be cached in advance. There is limitless possibilities of what FlexCache can bring to the table, and I think it's sneaky one of the ones that we're going to look back on in a few years and go, huh, didn't see that coming, because it's got so many implications.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I mean, we have a customer I was just talking to recently. They have one team of employees in the US and another team in APAC. And they told us they're using FlexCache. They have 2 FSx systems, one in US East 2, one in, I believe it's in Seoul, Korea, their other one. And they're using FlexCache between them so that they basically have these geographically dispersed teams all in on AWS, and they're able to get fast access to the data, and it's a single namespace. So they don't need to worry about replicating data, dealing with inconsistencies. from their perspective, from their users' perspective, it just works. And to your point, I do think it's we're just scratching the surface in terms of how customers can use this super powerful technology for a lot of these geographically dispersed workloads.
Yeah. All right, I want to flip the script on you a little bit here. We talked about all of the NetApp stuff that was brought into AWS. Let's turn that on its head. One of the big priorities that we spent 2 years sort of prepping for up to the launch was making sure that it was as natively integrated into the AWS console and with as many services as possible as a storage option. Where are things at with that? What would you say is, are you happy with where things are at? Are there more things that you'd like to see it integrated with, or without getting into roadmap and promises and all of that kind of stuff? Like, I know it was a big deal to us, mostly due to lessons learned. But it's one of the things that we took away from previous efforts here was, no, we need to work with the AWS side to make sure that there's internal native adoption on their part as well.
Yeah. So, as a product person, my job is to never be happy with where we are in anything. That comes with the territory. But in all seriousness, I am pretty happy with where we are in terms of integrating FSx ONTAP. I think one of the cool things we're seeing, and we scratched the surface on this a little bit earlier, is we're seeing a number of customers who've never even heard of NetApp or ONTAP before, who are using the service for the first time because it offers a range of capabilities, a certain performance for a certain cost with a certain range of features. And if that is the right mix for a given customer, we're seeing customers who've never heard of this technology before adopt it. And I think simply by having ONTAP available as a first-party native AWS service enables that kind of reach, kind of easy adoption for these broad base of customers. Yeah. When we launched, the service was natively integrated with a number of products Amazon offers. So, for example, all of your data on FSx is encrypted automatically using AWS Key Management Service, KMS. We integrate with AWS IAM. So all of your actions when you want to create file systems or SVMs or volumes or backups, all of this is managed, controlled via AWS IAM, Identity Access Management. And we integrate with CloudWatch metrics as well. So, for example, we automatically emit performance metrics, storage usage metrics, this kind of information natively into Amazon CloudWatch. That's available for you to see in the CloudWatch console. We also have our own dashboard in our console that's available. Fun launch we had actually since you and I last spoke just a few weeks back at Storage Day. We launched a new feature for FSx. Sorry, Nick, I forgot to fill you in. We launched an enhanced metrics feature for FSxN. Yes. So now we're emitting to customers some additional metrics. So, for example, things like CPU utilization, cache hit ratio, your specific disk IOPS, your network throughput utilization.
Is this using the onboard file system analytics stuff from ONTAP?
It's using a combination. So one of the great things is we can pull for ONTAP. So, for example, ONTAP is the one that tells us the cache hit ratio. ONTAP knows how much data is being pulled from RAM or flash cache versus storage. But we also have other means, within AWS to pull our infrastructure layer to get more infrastructure-related metrics like network usage. So it's a mix, just depending on what the metric is. But nice. That was a pretty exciting thing. Customers are asking, "Hey, I know my storage controller has a 25 gigabit per second NIC. Can I see how much I'm using specifically of my network bandwidth?" And so with these additional metrics, we just give customers a bit more insight into what's going on in the file system, what ultimately is happening at the infrastructure level.
Yeah, I'd love to see more so some of the design stuff, whether it's AWS config, some of the configuration tools of how do I, perfect example, last week, finally, they got rid of the transit gateways. Finally, we have VPC peering for VMC. Yep. Yes, finally. So I'm looking at do I have the right configuration? Do I have the right subnets? Do I have the right network adapters? Whatever is my configuration? Can we bless my configuration to make sure that everything is good? That kind of stuff I love seeing integrations into, because I think it's stuff that AWS people not take for granted, AWS users. I don't want to say they take it for granted, but they kind of assume it'll be there. But I look at it as with services like this that were sort of born on-prem and we're putting them into the cloud, there are pieces of it that might not be aware or might not be openly aware to cloud native users, if you will, as a phrase. How do we continue to expand some of that? I love the fact that we're doing the more detailed metrics. I'm curious to know where those are coming from. I want to go do some digging now, because you spooked me there. I wasn't sure what that was. But I'm going to go dig into find out what that where those metrics are coming from. Is that something you guys are measuring, or is it through the FSA API that's in ONTAP? I'm guessing it's going to be from there.
Yeah, it's a combination. I mean, we work really closely with an engineering team within NetApp. We of course have our own engineering team that we work with on the Amazon side. We similarly work with folks at NetApp, and so for each of these features, there's a bi-directional discussion of what's the right way of exposing particular information, and so it depends is the short answer.
Yep. Guys, real quick, looking at the time, we have plenty of time for questions. So if you have questions for Andy or myself or anything about AWS or the FSx ONTAP service, throw them in the chat. Let us know. We'll be happy to answer them here live on the air. Otherwise, I'm just going to hog him. I'm just going to take all of the time and continue talking to him. But thank you guys for being here. Andy, the other thing I wanted to ask you about was we can't get into roadmap stuff. We can't get into future stuff. We've just about delivered most of the stuff we want at this point, which, like you said earlier, you're never out of things. You never want for lack of want.
My job is to never be satisfied.
What was the thing? How do you sell this from your perspective? This is, I think we sort of talked about this before we went on the show, and I kind of want to have this theory crafting kind of discussion here at the end. How do you as AWS walk into a room and say, Mr. NetApp customer, I know you have been ride or die NetApp on-prem for 20 years, but come run it in the cloud instead. How do you prevent them from looking at that like it's a square peg that you're trying to shove into a round hole that is in a place they're unfamiliar with, that they haven't had any experience with? How do we get them over that hump? For me, it's usually the safety of ONTAP.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the great things about the service is we're kind of combining two things here. We're combining, this service is an ONTAP cluster as a service, as I mentioned earlier. ONTAP's been around for 30 plus years. All the robustness, the capabilities, all the kind of quality control testing NetApp does, that's embedded in the ONTAP part of the service. And in addition, AWS has, 15 plus, 20 plus years of experience managing large scale cloud services. And so, and this service really combines those two things. And so, I think that's the reality of the service. We spend most of our time on our team side, we spend thinking about thinking about topics like security and durability and availability, and ultimately, how do we as a managed service provide these things and constantly raise the bar on these things over time? And so for a lot of customers, it just comes down to those two things. It's telling customers, hey, you want to come to the cloud. A lot of our customers are looking to make that transition for all or a subset of their workloads. And it's really about finding the right service for their needs, given where they're coming from, given what they need.
Gotcha. That's great. First question's coming in from, I'll just say Segura. What about multi-protocol with SMB NFS plus S3? How do you want to take that one?
Yeah, sure thing. So when we launched FSx ONTAP, we supported multi-protocol SMB NFS. That's been around in the service for about 2 years. Starting about in June, I believe, we actually upgraded FSx ONTAP to the latest version of ONTAP, which is 9.12.1 at the time. As part of ONTAP version 9.12.1, ONTAP added a capability where you could create, it's called an S3 bucket, I think, within ONTAP, but it's basically an object namespace that you can access both with object APIs as well as with SMB and NFS. So that is supported even now. On any new file system you create in FSx today is going to be on version 9.12.1. And so we do actually support multi-protocol access to data on FSx using the object API as well as SMB and NFS.
And to segue into the next one from Darshana, asking about block storage.
Lots of protocol questions here. So we support access. I mentioned SMB NFS before for kind of NAS data access. We also, since day one, we've supported access to FSx ONTAP over iSCSI. It's actually a pretty popular use case we see with customers. For example, if you're running a database workload, We actually just recently published, I think it was earlier this week, a blog post showing how you can get really high performance to FSx ONTAP using iSCSI for a SQL Server workload. So yeah, so we do also support, you can create iSCSI LUNs, access that data across multiple EC2 instances. That is fully supported by the service.
Can we talk about, I mean, speaking of block storage, can we talk about NVMe, or is that considered future still at this point?
It's future for FSx. I know NVMe over TCP is part of ONTAP. I mean, what I would say in general is
it's part of the new generation of storage. Really, it's not just something that we're pushing. It's really where things are going. And there was this flop that happened about 10 years ago with NVMe over Fiber Channel, dealing with fabrics, that Cisco really tried to push, and it never really took off and went anywhere. The inverse is happening with NVMe over TCP because people are getting the high performance of NVMe, but over Ethernet fabrics that they already have and are used to working with and managing. We've seen a very large adoption rate of this with ONTAP systems with VMware, for example, vSphere. And I'm guessing it's future stuff. We'll get around to that at some point. But I was curious if you had any opinions on NVMe over TCP from the AWS perspective, just in general.
Yeah, to be honest, no strong opinions at the moment. One of the things we do before we kind of bring any feature to any of our services is we do a bunch of testing. Try to figure out how does it compare to what else is offered. And so I think the big question for us is how do we explain to customers, or how will we explain to customers how NVMe over TCP relates to iSCSI? I've heard really great things, so I'm not particularly concerned that we're going to find that NVMe raises the bar on several dimensions. But again, we're hoping to do some of that testing and get a bit more data over the next few months.
We're all sitting around waiting on you cloud guys to do it. Not just having some fun with you. But I mean, it's been wholesale adopted. It's one of those things that it's next generation data storage protocol that is here and is ready. And I personally, I'm anxiously awaiting for the cloud providers to kind of get on board and do the same thing, because it's going to unlock so much performance and scale that has yet to be seen. And I would bet under the covers somewhere in the deep bowels of the AWS infrastructure, it's being used somewhere. It's speculation, but I don't even want to say anything. But I bet it's being used somewhere as part of that. More questions, great stuff coming in. How big can the FSx target size be for a FlexCached? I'm assuming volume from on-prem. Is there any limit? What are the limitations and guardrails around FlexCache with regards to bringing in a volume from on-prem?
Sure. Yeah. So from FSx's perspective, there's no specific limits that FSx imposes that aren't just the standard ONTAP limits. So, for example, ONTAP, the maximum flex vol size, I think, is 300 terabytes. I believe FlexCache volumes are actually flex group by default. So there's virtually not a limit. I think it's 20 petabytes or something pretty large like that. But yeah, we haven't seen there be a particular limit customers have run into. It's the same ONTAP limits would apply to FSx.
I think that draws down to the file size, which I think is 128 terabytes currently. So it depends on what kind of storage you're using. If you're using LUNs, if you're using basically block storage, you're going to be limited to that file size versus the flex group volume size. So it really depends. I mean, if you're doing NFS, you're going to have a blast. There's theoretical limits, but you're really not going to hit those for single flex groups unless you are the biggest companies in the world. So great question there, Naren. But I wouldn't worry too much about that. I wouldn't lose sleep about that too much. Yeah. Next question coming up from Yoshiki. What about the service integration with AI/ML language models with FSx for ONTAP in the future to accelerate data-driven platform things like SageMaker and Bedrock?
Yeah, absolutely. So, obviously a hot topic nowadays, AI/ML, LLMs, and what customers are doing in the cloud. What I would say here, and this is a more general comment that absolutely applies to the space as well, but it also applies more generally to some of our other compute services like Lambda and ECS and EKS. I mentioned my role is to never be satisfied with where we are in terms of integrations and features. And so, over time, our goal is to continuously raise the bar. on how integrated any of our services is with one another. And ultimately, the prioritization and the timing for that, it largely stems from customer feedback. I mentioned FSx. The launch of the FSx family came directly from customer input, customer dialogues that we were having back in the 2016, 2017 timeframe. Same thing here as well. So, for example, we're seeing, we're seeing a number of customers today adopting FSx ONTAP with EKS. And NetApp's actually done a really good job here over the past few years. They have their own CSI driver called Trident that a number of customers are using with FSx ONTAP. And so as an example, we're working with the EKS team to figure out how do we raise the bar there and provide a more simpler integration so that customers using EKS for containers customers can already mount FSx ONTAP volumes from EKS, but it's around how do we make that even simpler for customers to do. So the same principle applies across any of our compute and analytics services as well.
Yeah. And we've kind of been on this crusade ourselves to how many services can we get have native visibility or integration and use FSx volumes as a data source, which leads, right into the next one. Another one from Darshana here, use cases for things like EKS. I look at things like image and container repositories, source repositories for Helm charts and things like that for EKS to be able to spin up Kubernetes workloads. The sky's the limit, Darshana, to answer your question. These are all things that I can't speak to whether or not they're actively being worked on, but they are all on a list somewhere of things that we've considered and things that I know Andy and I both promote as being, prime use cases for integration with FSx. Andy, any thoughts yourself?
Yeah, no, what I would say is I think with EKS and containers specifically, like the model that FSx ONTAP provides or that ONTAP provides of having kind of volumes within an SVM, within a cluster, it lends itself really well to Kubernetes and persistent volumes and a lot of those primitives that exist in the container space. So again, we're seeing as customers are either building new workloads or migrating workloads to containerized architectures. Again, customers already today can use Trident, can access FSx from that. And in terms of additional integrations in the future, that's largely just kind of roadmap based on customer input. But our goal and our intent is in places where customers are using two products together to raise the bar and prioritize making that integration even more seamless.
Yeah, you go in to put in a Lambda or an EPCS container, you have to choose where the container is coming from. Normally you would upload it or you would point to it in some other repository somewhere. I'd love to see like a volume that from FSx ONTAP, just as the drop-down selection there, or as part of the Terraform workflow to spin it up, or whatever it might be, CloudFormation, anything like that. Like that's the kind of stuff. One of the first things I went after personally was CloudFormation. Like I wanted to see like what it would be like to take something that would take 6 months and take it down to 30 minutes. Because the normal buying cycle, waiting for it to ship, arriving, unboxing it, racking it, stacking it, configuring, testing it, all that stuff could be a 6-month cycle on-prem. But here's this little piece of YAML, about 10 to 20 lines of YAML, and a somewhat pre-configured VPC with at least subnets defined. And I can take some YAML and throw it into CloudFormation and go get a sandwich and come back in 30 minutes, and there's my FSx ONTAP instance. Guys, if you don't believe me, there's videos on my YouTube channel. There's of me doing this. It's crazy what's possible with the levels of automation that we have now, and things that we just wouldn't have to deal with anymore. So I always say to people, "Whoa, it costs so much. Oh, it's all this stuff." Well, like, how much time and money and effort do you exude or expend to get something racked and stacked and configured and online in 6 months? From the point of inception? I want you to now take that down to 30 minutes and look at how much time, effort, and money you just saved. Because it will be a quarter of what you're spending. It will be, what you're spending now will be a quarter of what it used to be. And that if you factor everything into the picture. So
yeah, and I'd say I think a majority of our customers, if I remember correctly, are actually using Infra as code to model their FSx ONTAP deployments. And again, it's because of that. It's the simplicity, the repeatability, the ability to automate. If you need to spin up a DR site, being able to do it with the click of a button instead of at 3 a.m. trying to figure out how do I piece these things together again. That repeatability and automatability is a huge benefit for customers in the cloud. And CloudFormation is free, so you don't even need to pay on top of what you pay for FSx ONTAP.
You just pay for the resources that it spends that you tell it to spin up. But yeah, it's an amazing free automation engine to be able to do things, and it doesn't require like crazy amounts of Python or any of that kind of stuff. You can certainly use some of that stuff, but like simple tabbed YAML, like that's all you need to know. Define parameters, and it's like working with XML years ago, even simpler than that for some of that stuff. Another question came in: is it a global file system?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
No, not by the definition of the word, but it certainly can be looked at in that way. Kind of. That's such a nuanced question, because the ability for you to take the same data sets and have them in two separate places at the same time, sure, that's more of a mirrored relationship of two different file systems. But I would ask, don't think about the nuances of whether it is or isn't a global file system. Start at the top and start at the end and work backwards. Like, what workload what are you trying to accomplish? What workload do you want to do? Because 9 times out of 10, we can get you there. Whether or not it's considered a global file system or not, frankly, becomes irrelevant.
Yep. And one of the things I'd say is, so we even within FSx, if you just look at one file system, we offer 2 deployment options. We offer a single availability zone deployment option. Think of it as similar to you have an ONTAP cluster, you have an HA pair of servers and highly redundant storage within a single data center. That's kind of like our single easy deployment. We also have a multi-easy option for FSx, where actually if you create a multi-easy file system, your data is automatically distributed, replicated across multiple availability zones. Think of it as like multiple data centers within a region. And also the file system itself automatically fails over and fails back. So for a lot of customers, what they're looking for is resiliency against an individual data center kind of issue. And with the multi-easy file system, you can do that without needing to deploy any additional infrastructure. If you're talking kind of, again, multiple geographies, multiple cities, things like that, to Nick's point, a lot of it comes down to what specifically you're trying to achieve. As we talked about earlier, we have a number of customers who are using FSx, who are effectively creating global file systems with FSx ONTAP using FlexCache. Again, the example we gave earlier of a team in using US East 2, and then another team in Korea working on the exact same data. And all the customer did is they created one FSx system in one region, they created a second FSx in another region, and they configured it as a cache for the other. So there's a few different options. It really just depends on what you're looking for.
Speaking as an old infrastructure dinosaur, self-admitted, I will say that it took me a long time to come around to the idea of not focusing on bottom-up working with infrastructure to provide a service, but more thinking about workloads top-down. It took me years to flip my head around that. And I mean, after spending 20 years in the industry and thinking about things all the time as foundational bottom up, I had to really rewire my brain to think outcome and reverse engineer backwards from what the outcome of the workload that you want is. And I think that's super important for people to understand. Going from infrastructure to cloud requires a little bit of that rewiring. It requires you to approach some of these things a little bit differently. The people that are already working in the cloud might not understand what I'm talking about, or might not have ever worked with infrastructure on-prem, like some of that stuff. Some of them have. Some of them have also done the same rewiring exercise. Some of them are now cloud architects that have taken their infrastructure background and flipped it into working with cloud-native workloads, knowing all of the things, the building blocks that they need to scale and make that workload or app as performant as possible. But keep in mind, this isn't global file systems or global namespaces in the same context that we would think from an on-prem deployment, a geolocated, geodispersed deployment like that. You can absolutely recreate that in the effect using some of the tools Andy was just saying, like FlexCache, SnapMirror, things like that, multi-AZ deployments or cross-region type of scenario setups. But yeah, it's don't focus in on whether or not it's a global file system. Focus in on like what you want the workload to be up above it. Sorry, went on a bit of a rant there. All right, let's see what we got coming in. Just more follow-up there. Yeah, so really, this is a good one. Okay, so going off what we just said here, this was a follow-up from the same individual. File locking, how do we deal with that in things like multi-AZ deployments, or if you have a piece of data in two different places at the same time, or two different users accessing, typical NFS file locking type of stuff that we've dealt with for a long time now. Sorry, did I lose you, Andy?
I'm sorry. No, what was that, Nick? I may have lost you for a second there.
No worries. He's basically asking a follow-up on how we deal with file locking in multiple deployments and things like that. I know how we do it with ONTAP. I don't know if there's anything special you want to say about the deployment within AWS for multi-AZ deployments and things like that.
Yeah, so if we're talking again within the context of a multi-AZ file system, all that data is synchronously replicated across AZs. So think of it as kind of similar to a metro cluster type deployment.
Yeah.
There's not really any nuances when it comes to file locking. The data is synchronously replicated. It's as if you were working with a single cluster. It's just that cluster is stretched now across two availability zones. If we're talking again multi-region, multi-site, and we're talking, you want to know more about kind of how does locking work with FlexCache. The honest answer is I actually don't know too many of the details. The reason I don't, to be perfectly honest, is because we actually haven't had customers. We have dozens and dozens of customers using FlexCache. I've not come across a customer who's had an issue around locking specifically. I know FlexCache, that there's a bunch of mechanisms built into it to ensure consistency if you're modifying in the cache versus the source. So from what I've seen, it's worked pretty well, and we haven't had on the Amazon side, we haven't needed to dive in deeply enough, which usually comes if there's a customer who has an issue, to really learn more about the innards of it. So, what I would say is if you have more specific questions, again, happy to engage. We can pull in some folks from our solutions architecture team. We can pull in some folks from NetApp if you have kind of more detailed questions. But my short answer to that one is, from my understanding, locking actually works pretty well across FlexCache. It's built into the protocol itself.
Thank you very much for that, Andy. Now, I'll give you the floor for a couple of minutes. Final thoughts. It's August going into September, the fall of 2023, 2 years after the service has been launched. Like, where are you at? Are you nowhere near done? Are you happy with where things are at? What is your current state of the union of FSx ONTAP as we close out here?
Yeah, I mean, so as never happy with where we are. We're far from done, is what I would say.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really meaningful capabilities that I'm excited for us to have launched in the past year. As we look over to the next few months, without saying anything specific, what I would say is I'm very excited for reInvent and some of the announcements.
There's this show coming up in about 3 months called AWS reInvent. You guys might want to be there.
Yep.
There's this other show happening in 2 months called NetApp Insight, and you guys might want to be there too.
2 trips to Vegas.
2 trips to come on, bring them all. It's a fun fact. I've cut out nearly 80% of my travel by moving to Vegas. Think about that for a second. For all of you that are on the trade show circuit or go to a lot of shows, I don't have any status with any airlines or hotels anymore. That's one of the hardest realizations about living in Vegas is everything's here, short of coming up to AWS or Seattle for AWS. Or other places that might be up there. Like, that's the extent of it. The customer visit here or there. Yeah, no more trade shows. Traveling for trade shows. Andy, thank you so much for having me at Storage Day a couple of weeks ago. Thank you so much for always kind of being a partner in crime as we've brought this thing to market. We've done lots of interviews and videos and content together, and every single time I learn something new, and I love doing it with you. So thank you for that, and thank you for once again stepping up and being here for NetApp On Air and for all of the viewers and the listeners. But now we have the posterity on the interwebs of all things FSx going forward. So,
yeah, thank you. Yeah, I was just going to say, thanks, Nick, for having me. And, I know I touched upon this a few times in the presentation, but, it truly is the case that everything we do is based on what we hear from customers, discussions we have with customers, feedback we get. We talked a lot about features we've launched, features we're looking to launch, integrations that customers are asking for. Please reach out. Reach out to your NetApp account teams, your Amazon account teams. Find me on LinkedIn. My name's on the video. I'm always happy to. I'm always excited to hear about new and cool things customers are doing with the product. It seems like every few days we learn about something new that customers are doing, And again, I want to make sure that, if you have questions, if you have things you'd like to see, definitely would love to hear that feedback and make sure that as we're looking to our roadmap and how we want to invest, we're investing in the right areas for customers.
Absolutely. Well said. Couldn't have said it better myself. Once again, thank you very much, Andy. I'm going to let you get out of here. I've got some few closing thoughts for the folks to remind them of a few things. But once again, thank you very much for being a part of it today. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Take care, man. All right, folks. Well, there you go. Mr. Andy Crudge, a deep dive on Amazon FSx for NetApp ONTAP, or shortly FSxN, as we say. I definitely want to make sure that you guys are aware we are back for Insight. If you haven't heard, if you've been living under a rock the last month or so, we absolutely are back at the MGM Grand. Not Mandalay. We're back at MGM. We're taking it back old school 2013, going back to the big green building at MGM in Las Vegas. So make sure you come because I'll be there, and we're going to be doing lots of fun stuff. We've got breakout sessions, free certification tests. You can do all of the hands-on labs you want to do. We're going to have some really cool keynotes. We've got some cool speakers. And the big thing is like all of us are going to be there. So you get access to product managers, engineers, executives, VIP meetings, anything that you could want to do. There's huge opportunities for networking, for community building, which is a lot of the efforts that Drew and I are spearheading around Discord have to do with building that and nurturing that community. So we're going to be there hanging out. We're going to be doing some meetups. I'm trying to pull some fancy rabbits out of my hat and try and have us a dedicated little gathering. So we'll see how all of that plays out over the next couple of months. But October 23rd through October 25th, MGM Grand in Las Vegas for Insight 2023. And join us over in Discord at netappdiscord.com. You can find that fun little landing page, click the join server button, and you'll be brought into the community. And you can answer some quick questions of onboarding, and you'll be ready to go. I think that's it. The other thing that I'll give you guys a bit of a teaser on is we are rebranding. We've got some new graphics. We've got some all new stuff. This episode with Andy was the we'll call it the end of season 1. We started this back in January, and we've been working on some new graphics packages and some all new fun stuff. So the next set of episodes you're going to see as we go into the fall trade show season is going to be a little different, but better. I think you guys will enjoy it. For Andy Crudge, my name is Nick Howell. Thank you very much for joining us today. This has been an episode on FSx for NetApp ONTAP in AWS. And we'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.